Good afternoon, everybody, or just afternoon. So our speakers and panelists are to come on. Nandi's from UNB is going to say a few words, and then I'm going to take over. I'll do a little mini introduction to the tool you're on, as well as the topic of conversation we're going to have. So Nandi, if you want to turn your camera and your mic on, so I'll allow you to start things off.
All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first interactive networking event of the Apex Business Plan competition. Today we had the practice rounds for the undergraduate teams, and I had the absolute pleasure of interacting with many of you today. Welcome to the interactive panel on totally digital work in business. And it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the panel, Levi Lawrence. Levi is a serial entrepreneur and owner of Pragmatic Solutions. Pragmatic Solutions is a fast-growing company that allows small and medium enterprises to leverage digital technology. Levi describes himself as an entrepreneur who helps entrepreneurs thrive. And Levi also has past experience in the food and beverage industry, hospitality, and e-commerce. Levi is also a past winner at the Apex Business Plan competition. So you should pick his brains for any tips and advice on that. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Levi. Thank you so much for organizing this today.
Great. Thanks a lot. So first, thank you for coming to the conversation. I think this panel discussion is going to be really great. I do want to just show a little bit of this new tool so you feel more comfortable. This tool is called Remo. The idea is that you're able to direct and virtually network with people when we're not in presentation mode. So when we're done the conversation and we close down the presentation, you're going to be able to navigate and go to different tables and feel free to stick around and have a follow-up conversation. It'll stay on for at least an hour afterwards. I think you already introduced me and my business, Pragmatic. One of the story I wanted to tell a little bit is that the Apex Business Competition is actually something that's really close to me, even though I don't attend and participate very often. In 2009 or 10, I won second place for a business called Real Food Connections, which I did take and actually grow for 7 years. But more importantly, that second prize winning amount allowed me to buy the engagement ring my wife wears. So the story of the Apex Business Plan for me is actually always kind of special. I've also met some of the judges that were in my year in 2009, 2010, are still people I now work with in the entrepreneurial and business community today. I don't think there's any relationship I built in that weekend over 10 years ago that isn't now a valuable colleague in the ecosystem. So I'm not going to talk much about me. I think that in general, because of COVID, it was already happening, but because of COVID, we've accelerated the digitization of some business models, some industries, some sectors, and we've forced a lot of companies to learn how to work more virtually. I don't believe, personally, and I can't wait to hear the opinions of our panelists, I don't believe we're going to go right back to any kind of semblance of what was known as normal a year ago. And I think there's some challenges, but I also think there's some huge opportunities, both from inside workplaces, for employees, and also for new business owners and growing businesses. And I'm interested to have that conversation. So I'm going to first introduce you to some of our panelists, and then I'm going to ask a direct question to each one of them. So you'll have a little bit of insights from each one. I have some general questions at that point, but I encourage you, as you hear them speak and hearing their views, because it is a really broad subject, that you use the Q&A function. So to the right hand of your screen, you go to the Q&A and start lining up questions you'd love to hear them or somebody addressed. And I have some questions prepared that I'd like to hear, but I'm going to make sure we take in from the audience as well. We should be able to start and hear from those questions just past the halfway mark, depending on how rich the conversation is. If you want to have a chat back and forth, you can use the chat function, which is also an option. And I have one of my team actually going to be monitoring and responding. So if you have technical troubles or any support you need, you can ask questions there, and I have somebody who will be responding. So let's get started. Let's start with introductions. I'm going to start with Adrienne. Adrienne is the only one of the panelists that I had the privilege of knowing before. She's the newest VP of Client Success for a quickly growing company, Mesh Diversity. And it offers services and software to help companies use data to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think this is a really big thing, especially as teams become more separated and more remote. So I'm excited to hear that viewpoint. I first met Adrienne in her role as a CEO of the New Brunswick Business Council, and I've come to think of her as a really great resource and a network node when I'm trying to communicate and build relationships. So I hope that you all remain connected, and I'm sure you're all using your LinkedIn properly and making sure that you've made that connection. Mike Power, he's a consultant and a business development specialist with MB Power and Associates. I keep wanting to say NB Power, but MB Power. And I'm confident that business development has been an interesting and exciting world in the last year. I bet a lot of new lessons have been learned, so I'm excited to hear about that. He has been a consultant, account executive, business development professional throughout his career. And my favorite part of his very well curated LinkedIn profile, for anybody who wants to look at it, it's very well done, is that he brings new perspectives to complex business problems, which I think is the new skill set that everybody should try to achieve in their careers. And I think we have it across the panel. Our next panelist, and our last but not least, is Pierre-Andre. He is a senior manager of advisory services for EY or Ernst & Young. He's a graduate of Harvard Business School, a past associate of McKinsey, and once the CEO of his own company. He has built a reputation for using advanced analytics and process improvement techniques to help executives and companies. I also personally love that in his LinkedIn profile, he actually uses the term pragmatic in regards to his approach, which, since my name is Pragmatic Solutions, and I love that word, I thought that was extra special. I look forward to hearing his perspective, especially because data and analytics is a big part of the future as we become more digital. All of our panelists today are proven to be quick learners, strategic thinkers, and keen observers. I really hope we're going to have a diverse, interesting discussion. And just one sec, I forgot paper. I'm going to start off and give a chance for each panelist to offer some commentary. I've prepared a question, and I've had a chance to talk to them each in the past. And then after that, we don't want to take too long on those. We're going to then open it up to some general questions. I'm going to be looking for the Q&A. So I don't know how long this will take, just a few minutes, but they're really interesting points that will frame up the rest of our discussion. So I'm going to start with Adrienne. One of the conversations we've had in the past is that although there's all kinds of opportunities, and we're going to talk about those opportunities with work being more digital and new business models being developed, there are also some challenges or some potential double-edged swords. I was wondering, with your experience while on the New Brunswick Business Council and your current viewpoint from Mesh Diversity and client relationships, what are your thoughts on how the local ICT sector or any virtual sectors might be affected by local talent now being able to have access to jobs anywhere in the world, and that back and forth? I think there's pros and cons, and I'd love your thoughts on that.
Great. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to be here today, and thanks for the introductions and the moderation, Levi. And I can see from the comments and the chat, we're already off to a good start. So yeah, this idea of, what are some of the opportunities and challenges that come from, the changes that have taken place in our world over the last year, they're innumerable. But one of them, and this is something a colleague of mine and a good friend of mine, Kathy Simpson, who is the CEO of Tech Impact, that we started to see in some of our work together over the last year. And in particular, not just the ICT sector in itself, but for all businesses, is that as we get our minds around this idea of that, there's always been this segment that place was irrelevant, but now it's just so mainstream that you can work from anywhere. And so for us for business in New Brunswick, you're right. I think that's a good way of saying it. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. So I think what we're going to see is that people can work from New Brunswick and work for companies all over the world. And there's a real opportunity for retention, I think, is a really positive piece out of that, is that oftentimes the narrative that people hear is that, okay, you get your education here, and then where to from here? And what this really allows is for us to really to use that opportunity that you can have by living here in New Brunswick, access to nature, access to opportunity, but you can work, for companies anywhere. The pressure that's going to create for local companies, I think, in some of the conversations we've had, is that it could potentially push wages up. So it was always a trade-off before, is, oh, I could work for a Toronto-based company, but I got to move to Toronto, my cost of living is going to be. Now we've almost got the best of both worlds here. And so that's going to create a little bit of upward pressure potentially on wages and salaries here for New Brunswick-based companies. But the other, that while that's a challenge, the other side of things is that now we can sell from anywhere. And so what has always been some, sort of tagged as one of the challenges of starting a company here, whether a physical company, a SaaS model company, now you can sell from here. Place is independent. It's what you're selling that becomes more important, not whether or not you can displace yourself from New Brunswick in a day to get down to San Francisco or fly to Boston or New York in a day, back and forth in a day. So that also reduces cost for companies. So I think that we're going to just see a little bit of a shift there. So I'll leave it there, and we can explore a little bit further. But those are my initial thoughts on that question.
No,
thanks
a lot. And I think it's not only what you're selling, it's still also how you're selling. I'm going to move on to Mike. So Mike, we had a brief conversation. You had lots of different insights. So I'm going to leave you a little bit of an open-ended question and allow you to take it where you will, because I did enjoy many of your insights. The way I'm positioning this is that there are many industries which are being disrupted. But we've also seen a lot of new opportunities in some what we consider traditional sectors. What industry or sector do you feel is going through a lot of change, but also experiencing new opportunities and ways of doing business that are positive?
Thanks, Levi. I'm out of the IT industry, ICT industry now for about 4 or 5 years, and with the with the half-life of knowledge in that industry being, pardon me, about 12 months, my recollection of it is somewhat dated. I've moved into the real estate industry in the last 3 or 4 years, and I'm on the board with the Greater Moncton Real Estate Board, and have watched this transition occur driven primarily because of COVID in the last year. And interestingly, what's occurring is when the pandemic hit in March, everything stopped. We were told to stay home, put down your tools. You can't sell things. You're no longer in business, and you're not considered essential. And we quickly realized, well, hold on a second, we are essential. There's people who've got their homes sold, and they are stuck now. There's people who have bought a home and they need to be able to move into it, but we're not allowed to go on site. We're not allowed to get too close to people. So we went from an industry that was very much relationship-based, hands-on, in-your-face kind of industry, and had to turn it into a digital industry overnight. So it went from basically knocking on doors to having 360-degree cameras doing virtual tours of properties to be able to show people what they had just bought or what they needed to approve to close on a deal. And we went from all of a sudden the things on your phone like FaceTime, which we always took for granted, became an integral part of how we did business with our clientele. And it wasn't really until we went through that I realized that that the difference this digital economy was going to be making to real estate. It's been quite the challenge over the last 12 months, but everybody seems to be stepping up to it. It's very interesting.
Well, thanks a lot. So let's move on. I did have a question prepared, but then we had an exciting conversation earlier. So I want to set the stage. Pierre-Andre, from what I understand of our brief conversations and your LinkedIn profile, which again is really well developed, everybody should take really good examples from our panelists, is that there's a lot of opportunity around using data and analytics in a new way as we have increasing amounts of data. And a lot of your conversations earlier with me was about challenging to think about all the different opportunities, maybe differently than what was obvious. So I was wondering if you could share the little bit of story you were sharing with me as you arrived today, of how data and analytics and virtual information has been able to be used.
Yeah, thank you, Levi. Thank you for the introduction. And I think the meeting, the Zoom meeting I had last week, as a Harvard MBA, we had a gathering last week over Zoom, and one of the person talking was actually one of my classmates, Stéphane Bancel, French citizen. I don't know whether you know him, but you certainly know his company. His company, he founded 10 years ago, is Moderna. So the second company in the world to bring a vaccine in the market. And so the discussion was extremely interesting and shows the power of digital, because this company did not exist 10 years ago. By the time the COVID breakout, they had never sold any vaccine, even manufactured any. And within 42 days, they were able to go from nothing to a prototype to deliver to the FDA for testing. The most interesting thing is that when you look at the big pharma like the Pfizer of the world, the Johnson & Johnson, with long established experience, a lot of know-how, they came from almost nothing, but they have never touched the virus. So how did they go about it? How did they do it so fast? So what they did is they started from the China government releasing the DNA in electronic format over the web. And then they applied the machine learning, advanced analytics, and they basically disrupted the industry and came up with a prototype faster than anyone else. And so everything that what a secret sauce of this organization is that they also integrate all the data. So from getting the first DNA code up to manufacturing the first samples, all the data is shared on the system. And so they were faster to come up with the prototype to be tested. It's just that because of the size of the organization, they were not able to produce as fast as Pfizer, but they were second. So they outpaced the Johnson & Johnson of the world. I recently heard this morning, actually, Merck is giving up on the vaccine. So Sanofi is also out of the game for several months. So this shows that, if you know what to do, the wealth of the data, it is a bit my business now, what I do as a consultant is to think in terms of the algorithm. What I study, because my background is applied mathematics engineering, 20 years ago, these algorithms were there. So the method to come with from data to solution existed. What has been the difference of the past 20 years is the wealth of data that's been accumulated, and it's readily available to anyone, like this DNA code. And so if you bridge the wealth of data on the one hand, the algorithm, and then in addition to that, the power of the computers that's significantly increased over 20 years. It's an exponential law. And so you have the three together, you have a fantastic cocktail to make a breakthrough, like we have seen with Moderna. So I think it was interesting and very interesting conversation we had last week, and shows the possibility that are open to us these days.
I like that I'm the first one who tried to talk on mute. So I do have some questions prepared. We had one question come in to me specifically that I thought I'd share, because I think it's an interesting jumping off point before we get into the others. So somebody is wondering why I use the term of, or why I said that we are likely not going back to what was normal a year ago. And that's my personal belief. I am interested in hearing some other perspectives. So the person on here is A. And they're wondering what my key reasons are and not going back to that state. Post-vaccination, why do we think that they're not going back to in-person presence? And I think that some industries will, and I think that a lot of companies will have that as an option. In my experience, having worked with quite a few business owners of varying sizes, especially if they have people from different areas, provinces, countries, when they've figured out that they can make it work much leaner and effectively without plane tickets and hotel rooms and commutes, I think a lot of companies are going to have a hard time. They're going to need to see a better business case before they put people in hotels and go to all the same conferences. So that's my personal opinion of why I think we're going to need to have a virtual component to any company trying to hire a certain generation or people who are now used to working remotely. And businesses like the traditional trade show, it'll be only certain industries who really see value that'll go back to just that way of selling. I was wondering if anybody had any specific thoughts on whether we're going back to a old normal or what the future might look like post-vaccination phase. Any thoughts? Feel free to come off mute. I see Adrienne, you can right off mute.
Well, Pierre-Andre is off mute too, so I guess whoever wants to dive in. But yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you, Levi, is that the other thing too, what I would say yes to everything you've said, and I would add that really when you think of it, especially internal meetings, when I think about all the internal meetings that used to take place, and I think about even myself, how many times I used to drive to Fredericton. And I think we've just gotten so much more used to that. We know now we can have these conversations, we can collaborate. And a lot of firms are also seeing an enhanced productivity, right? So the business case is there to say, not only can we do it, but it's actually in some ways more effective. So I think you're right. We're going to be a lot more discerning about when it's necessary and when it's not. And we have to also remember that the tool, people's knowledge of how to use these tools has accelerated so much over the last 12 months. So you can't unlearn that, right? You know that it works. You've created, you've had this kind of learning. And so there will be, there's still relationships, there's still that human interaction that we all crave. But as you say, I think the business model has probably changed forever. To what extent? Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Yeah.
Pierre-Andre or Mike? Mike?
Yeah, I think the pressure right now, particularly because of COVID, on the bottom line has been fairly dramatic. And what used to be taken for granted is now seen as a luxury. So, Adrienne jumping in a car to go to Fredericton for a 1-hour meeting and take the whole day to do it is a waste of an executive salary and all, everything that's associated with that. I think it's just a luxury that in this financial environment, most companies are going to say, we just can't afford that. Our customers don't appreciate it. They'd much rather a discount than, a face-to-face meeting for an hour.
Yeah, for sure. Any notes to add, Pierre?
Yeah, I'd say I agree with you, Levi, with two caveats in my industry, at least as a management consultant. Number one is developing new clients, so establishing the first relationship. You can't beat the face-to-face first introductory meeting conversation to establish, credibility and trust. So once it's established, I think you can do it remotely without any problem. But this first contact, I think face-to-face, in person, is still critical. The second area that I see these days is that one of my clients requires me to come on site, although we turned red. And so there have been conversations with the headquarters in the US, and they said, no, actually he needs to be here. When it's about implementation and convincing people and really change behavior and explain things in detail and understanding, ensure that you understand the situation. When it's about change management, there is still place for being in the same room, and especially when we talk about major change in a plant, in a factory. So that is the two areas where I think there is still room in the long term for in-person meeting. But for the rest, a lot of things that are analytical, digital, can be done remotely.
This is a great segue. Thank you very much. I don't disagree with either caveat, but it's brought up a topic that's really near and dear to myself. So I started a pivot of this company just after COVID started, and we've made the decision to build an entirely virtual team for now and forever in the future. So it's become a design. We didn't have to digitize a new team. We had to design what will become virtual. What has become a really interesting question, and I'm going to start with Adrienne. I know you're new in your role with Mesh Diversity, but there's some pieces of this that I think you might have awareness of. I'm open to anybody's response. In a company where you're going to have either partially or fully remote workers, where you're not going to have the entire team together in a shared experience or space, what can companies do, or what do you think can be done to create the culture? A lot of companies I talk to, what makes it good to work with you? And they say, oh, our culture is great. I think that this is a fundamental question to a lot of companies of what is your culture? Because in a world in the future where there's no water cooler and there's no drinks after work, what, if you've seen any best practices or what ideas have you seen to create the trust? So to Pierre-Andre's mention, I believe in the sales that it likely be more like you'll have to stay the in-person meetings. But I know companies now have to onboard whole teams that are going to work together very closely, and they're never going to be able to meet each other in a personal way. How can we build that culture? Maybe Adrienne, I'll start with you, and then I'll open it up with Mike and Pierre-Andre.
Yeah, so this idea of building trust and building culture, these are important shifts that are also taking place. And so just for everyone who's in this conversation today, so the organization that I work with, Mesh Diversity, has always been a virtual company. Actually, we're 14 people and growing, and then but the organization started out as virtual. But for myself, as someone who worked in a different model in different organizations and coming into this, it's been really interesting. It adds a whole other layer of learning. Because you're right, there's this element of having to work virtually. But let me just give you a couple of examples of things, not only from Mesh Diversity, but other companies that we've had conversations with, as part of either the Business Council or some of the work that we've done with other Atlantic Canadian companies. There are a few things that are a little bit different. And like we've been talking about, I'm not sure that they're going to change. Even some of the questions that are online there, the 3-2-2 model. I think these are all things that we're going to adapt to. But one of the things that I've heard is the best practice is that we have to make time as leaders for one-on-one sessions with people. People need that connection. And you know what, you may not have had that in the environment, like a scheduled one-on-one in perhaps the old office environment, but in this new environment, that's going to be really critical. So everyone that you work with is to have that dedicated time. We actually do have things like drink o'clock every week where you can still go for a drink with your colleagues. It's just, it's a virtual drink. So, and in fact, you know what, this is one of the things that I noticed is that attendance at some of the meetings that we would have with the Business Council was much higher in a virtual environment for exactly what Mike said. It wasn't good use of time to have to, to do the travel, and people had to weigh that and opt out. And what I found is that a lot of people are choosing not to opt out because it does take that element away. Some of the other things that we have in a virtual environment are called all hands meetings, where everybody comes together, the whole company comes together, and how important those connections are. And what I've really had to adjust to is that often when you're going to meetings, you go to the meeting, a physical meeting, and you jump right into it. There's a different cadence with a virtual organization because you do have to build in that time in those meeting times. And I found that a little bit of an adjustment because I'm used to just showing up and getting to work at these meetings because we got an hour and then we got to hit the road or we're on to the next. And we have this open Zoom link. It's just an open, anyone can hop into each other's. So you always have the meeting room. You may not have the water cooler, but you got the open Zoom link that you can always start a conversation and your colleagues are right there ready to chat. So those are some things that I've seen not only within Mesh, which is a total virtual organization, but others adapting to this new way of working.
I love that everything you're saying is validating for what we're trying. I was afraid that it was going to come out with that we weren't doing a good job. Mike, Andre, do you have any other thoughts before I move on? Mike?
Yeah, I think, as Adrienne points out, it really boils down to leadership, particularly around culture. I came from IBM in my early days, and it, there was a defined culture there that covered everything from how you dressed to how you behaved to whether or not you drank and when. And there was a very defined culture, and it's I watched as it changed over the years, and I can imagine how it's changing now. The other thing I notice is that the generation of folks that are probably sitting at the tables here today are the answer to that. They are they consume information at a rate that's amazing compared to how we would have learned. They network in a way that would boggle the mind of somebody from my generation for sure, and they do it very quickly. So if you've got a leader who who wants to establish a culture where you're much better together, creates the environment for people to do things that, like Adrienne has suggested, which is to network, in a different way, and to tap into that network when it comes to work. I think it'll be. I think that generation is a lot further ahead than we think they are.
Adrienne.
Just one quick thing I want to add is just about how things have changed. As somebody sort of who is alumni of UNB from a number of years ago, and coming onto this company with a lot of platforms and tools that I would have never used when I was sort of working sort of as a sole employee of the Business Council, is for those who have those capabilities to support those of us who are learning this stuff, right? To help bring us along in some of those new technologies and those new ways of working. So when it comes to building trust and inclusivity, and it's how do we I guess we talk about reverse mentoring. So how do we make sure that everybody in this new way of working? So I would so for those in the audience, remember those of us who are learning all of this stuff and how you can be helpful to help us collaborate and use some of these tools that are coming into the workplace. That's my little pitch. Bring me along with you.
I'm going to double down on a small plug. So Pragmatic Solutions is actually hiring right now and specifically looking for people who are really good at all those digital tools and platforms, because that's a new skill set. We run 42 different platforms and tools for different businesses, and we just want people who are really interested in that complexity. So yeah, I think it's a new skill set that everybody's going to be looking for sure. So I'm going to move on to the next one. I think we have some really great questions in the Q&A. There's an upvote capacity, so anybody who wants to really make sure that questions get answered that they want to hear, make sure you hit the vote. So it's unlikely that we'll get through all the questions before the end of the experience. But one question that I think is really important, I think the answer is obvious, but I'd like to hear other people's opinions. With the global pandemic going on, do you think that it's a good time to open a business? I will put out there that I think absolutely, and for many reasons, but I'm not going to go into detail of this. I'm not the experts. Anybody want to respond to that? Do you think now in a pandemic it's a good time to start a business? Nobody. I'm going to take that as Pierre-Andre, you didn't get a chance. Do you have any thoughts on this? Oh, you're still muted.
Might not be insightful at all, but I would say it depends. So if certainly your business plan is about disruption and seizing the opportunities of the digital world, and you take a gap that is being created by this situation, then probably it's a good time. But it's not it's all depending on what you want to do. But there's certainly a change. Always create opportunities.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to find what is the gap in terms of service, customer needs that is not fulfilled anymore, and try to come up with a solution. And that's what the business plan contest is about, actually.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else before we move on? No, Mike?
Quick comment. I know I've been doing this for at least 15 years, but it could be longer. And I've watched the business case competition evolve and the teams that are in it evolve. And my observation is that each year, on average, the quality of what they do and how they explain themselves and the ideas that are being brought forward seems to improve. There's always a few real interesting ones every year, but on average, I think I'm seeing a real progression in terms of the ideas that are coming up. And I keep saying, just go do it. Go figure it out, learn your lessons, and have fun doing it. And I think there's no time like the present. We need new ideas, and I think we're getting them from these folks.
Yeah, I would say so. One of the things I do as a personal thing is I coach post-secondary students who are newcomers on entrepreneurship and finding careers. I do it through the Study and Stay program, and I'm working with entrepreneurs who are starting all kinds of new ideas. And what I'm finding is that you can start a business much easier or lower cost than in some industries than you could before. So there's a lot of opportunities to get started, and I love to see the creativity. So similar question. If you were a brand new graduate today, so channel your inner new graduate of whatever degree, what would be the businesses or the sector or the jobs that you would be most excited about? If you knew that you've just finished some education and you're looking forward and you're starting at the beginning of a career, given that we're in the mid-pandemic, because a lot of people, I feel, especially post-secondary, it's a lot of doom and gloom and stress around what I expected when I started my degree is no longer there. What do you guys think would excite you about the opportunities of the future in this digital world? I'd love to hear some thoughts from any of the three of you. It's like role playing. Pretend you're a graduate. Like
artificial intelligence. I pick up the phone, call Pierre-Andre, and say I want word as much as I can about this. I think the environment is going to revolutionize the way people work. The idea is that the white collar worker is no longer protected from these advances. If anything, they can be replaced in great numbers. So if you can figure out how to tap into artificial intelligence and make it yours, I think you'll be you'll be an excellent worker in the future.
Great. Pierre.
Yeah, that is exactly what my business is doing. The only disadvantage that I have is that compared to the young generation, they know the tools, newer tools. They are much better than I am probably at Python and other open source tools to do machine learning and AI. So if I were them, that's an area where actually you can show value. The job that I do is I take data that exists within an organization outside and apply these techniques that I learned a long time ago with the tools that are available. I don't have to reprogram everything, and then predict the future. And the good thing about predicting the future is that you can compare whether you are good or not. If you just take the data and not forget about the last 3 months and try to replicate, what could have happened and compare what really happened with your prediction, it's difficult for a business leader to say, it's not going to work. Actually, you proved it. And I think for the new generation, the thing that is their advantage is this familiarity, with the coding, and so that is an area where they can differentiate. And when it's not about experience, but it's about taking data and making inference with the tools, experience doesn't matter anymore. The only thing that is required is maybe the ability to take a business problem and translate it into a mathematical problem that can be resolved with AI or whatever. That's probably the only gap. But the learning curve now is way faster because the algorithm enables you to come to a solution. And I'll give you just a quick example. I've worked for a shipyard, accumulated 19 years of data, 19 years of electronic data. So when I think, an area like shipbuilding is, not really what you think in terms of digital organization, but this data, I didn't know what they could do with it. And so using artificial intelligence, they can come up with a way to estimate the time it will take to repair a ship in a matter of seconds. And especially when you're someone with build experience and is about 65, 70 years old, and you wonder how can you basically transfer that knowledge to experience from someone to a younger person. So that's where the digital age and the artificial intelligence plays in. The question is will the people be willing to trust the tool? And that's what you can do with technology. And that is where the face-to-face, and when you talk to people, they're going to tell you yes, but the body language, someone tells you something else. And that's the face-to-face. One-on-one you can see, but in your group with 20 people online, you can't see the body language of everyone, whether they agree with you or they are not convinced.
Yeah.
And that's people at the end of the day.
Adrienne.
I would say some of the other areas when I think about, okay, so what's hopeful now in terms of what's going to be needed next for new grads. It's sort of along the same type, same vein that Mike and Pierre-Andre were talking about. But I would say, the whole experience of work is changing, how we lead. So leadership, how does leadership change? There's going to be nuances. Human resources, there's a great Q&A about how do we now, what's this whole performance management, performance monitoring? How do we measure productivity? How do we measure outcomes? There's a lot of big questions. And you think about how education, even university, right? Universities are changing. There's so much change management and so much understanding of just the digital world, and how do you create trust and build relationships? How do you sell in this new environment? That there's so many things that have been disrupted that in addition to what Mike and Pierre-Andre talked about, there's this whole culture, trust, human resources piece that all has to be rethought of in a new way. And that rethinking and that disruption of those things as well are going to be really necessary. So really digging down into how organizations are going to respond to that, how leadership has to change, how recruitment changes, how does compensation change, all those things are just up for rethinking. So it's if you look at it that way, it can be a really exciting time to bring sort of this experience that we're all having into a new way of work.
One of the ways I heard somebody else explain this to me is that we've learned that you can manage almost anything virtually, but leadership is still complicated. And if anybody was to spend more time developing their skills or personalities, leveraging it on learning leadership and taking the opportunities to be leaders, that's going to be the absolute skill that'll be necessary in the future for sure. So we have one question that's risen way to the top. So I do want to get some thoughts on that. In your opinion, is there any industries that are currently developing, but that will dissolve post-COVID? Anybody want to get out the crystal ball? So, anybody?
I've been looking at this one since it popped up in the Q&A, and I've been thinking about it, and I have to say I can't come up with anything. I would love to hear from the audience too about what's popping to mind for you. I can see some that are going to maybe didn't develop as a result of COVID that are probably not going to survive. I think we all knew those, but yeah, what's developed and will likely go away post-COVID? That's a very interesting question, but I have to say, I would love to see people's comments in the chat from the audience and play with that a little bit. I couldn't come up with one.
I gotta tell you, my personal wish, I don't know if it will, because people love convenience, but I am a chef by trade and I'm a foodie at heart, and I love the experience of really well done food with families. If the culture continues towards skip the dishes and doesn't go back to somewhat of a real life experience, I'm going to be very disappointed in the population as a general. But
as a restaurant owner, I second that.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I really hope that that's not going to be the normal trend. Any thoughts before we move on, Mike, on Pierre-Andre?
I think the oil industry is getting ready to take a serious hit here. I think they're all trying to figure out how to get out of the business they're in, and it's interesting to watch right now because the demand for their products is shrinking pretty dramatically right now, and I don't see it changing. I mean, think about the airline industry and the effect this is having on them. There's long-term implications that is going to make it difficult for that oil industry to survive. There's a lot of people wanting to go out of business. So between that and the travel industry, it's going to be interesting to see how it transforms and repurposes itself and redefines its role, because people are not going to be willing to pay for it in the future.
Yeah. Pierre-Andre? You're good? Oh, you look like you're ready to unmute. There you go.
Yes, wrong button. No, I think in terms of industry, I don't have really an answer, but I can certainly see that some jobs are going, and it's not announcing it on my own. You read the news, and several articles have been talking about the fact that machine learning, artificial intelligence is going to make possibly some job redundant, and everyone is at risk in some sort of a fashion. Even you wouldn't think that, but a doctor, a consultation, you can do it now on the web. HR, I mean, now the young generation is getting used to recording interviews. They used to be face to face with a person, and then the algorithm behind, and then they look at the way you behave, your body language, and try to make inferences based on not just what you say, how you say it, your intonation, and your body language. So several jobs that you'd say very much people related. Now we bring this everywhere. I think it's a fear, but we need to be to think that it's coming. And there is another risk comes with that, is that when you use too much of predictive analytics, is that you take data and the inference will be as powerful as the data that you had in the past. So it is, you need to be able to adapt. And I think mankind has been good at it over the past. There's been over the centuries major changes, and we'd call it about Industry 4.0. There's been the version 1, the version 2, the version 3, but over time we have always been able to adapt. I just hope that we will not let too many people behind.
Yeah, and thank you. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to at least one other question, and then I'm going to give a little bit of time for each of our panelists to offer any final notes, their thoughts on the digital future. And the question, because most of our audience are students, either finishing or at some point in their student career, I was wondering, from your insights, as you've been helping them on their projects in this competition, what do you think the long-term effects of COVID-19 will be on the education industry? Any crystal balls or thoughts on what that looks like? It is definitely one of the more popular questions presented by the audience. Wondering if anybody has any thoughts. I'll give you some cover while you think about it. My feeling is that more and more nimble institutions that were able to adapt or design services to be a better experience are probably going to come out and be more competition with the traditional education institutions that aren't able to change due to bureaucracy. I think it's going to be a more dynamic education space. We'll find out if I'm wrong. I'm wrong often. So, any other thoughts on your end? Adrienne, Mike?
Yeah, sure. I agree with what you're saying, Levi. It's really those organizations that can be nimble. And we immediately go to what can be offered online, right? How can we teach online? How can that be effective? What tools are we going to use? We move immediately to the teaching part, but there's this whole other part of the experience of being part of an educational institution that we really have to figure out. And so I think those that figure out how do you connect, how do you support students, right, in this new environment? What kind of supports can a university or a post-secondary, any education institution wrap around that? So, answering the question around how to do the education part, but those institutions that figure out how to do all those other elements that go around that. Another big part is, how do you create connections between students, right? So that you get that element of it. How do you create connections to employers? In fact, I almost think it's an opportunity to really accelerate experiential learning. And so again, I think any institution that can figure that part out too is to have a closer connection to the not-for-profit, private sector, public sector and creating employment opportunities for students. If you can nail that, then that's a competitive advantage that you'll have in this new environment.
Oh, great thoughts. Any add-on, Mike, Pierre-Andre?
I think to Adrienne's point, I think the problem that we have right now with people can't go to school. They are isolated when they do for weeks, coming and going. They are stuck in a red zone and they have to be able to essentially learn long distance anyway, is going to create an opportunity for people who get through this and do well along the way to have learned how to lead, how to communicate in a compelling way, how to network like nobody else, and how to learn faster than we ever thought possible. To be able to be successful in that environment, and that will create the kind of person that will be successful in the direction we're going, I believe.
Great. Pierre-Andre?
After what I heard from Adrienne and Mike, it's difficult to add more on what they said. I hear a lot of the relationship with people and the skills, the people skills that are being a challenge, and those who are able to do it in the new digital world will certainly differentiate. There is also for the students the challenge to be on their own as a teenager. I think if we have children, we see that they have not a normal teenager time, and this is a challenge. If I want to just finish with something positive about it, I'll say that there were platforms that were available like Khan Academy and others, where you have well-curated courses in the basic fields of high school and middle school. And so what is good is that even though you live in a remote or rural area, provided that you have, which will be critical in the future, access to the internet in a meaningful way so that you can stream. If you have that access, now you have access to the best courses around the world offered over the internet. You have on the same level as those going to the top school, that by the way cost a lot for the parents. So you kind of rebalance the chances of every children, provided that they have the good coaching from their parents. And this is, again, people. So if at the end of the day, the same as, and there's a way that those learning by themselves, with the willingness to learn with the tools that are made available to them, have the chance to take an exam, let's say an engineering exam, without having to go to the top school or whatever, but they're given the same chance as anyone else to do well in their life, wherever they come from. Then this is something very positive for mankind overall.
Yeah, very insightful. That was a really great final point. I'm gonna give each speaker a quick moment just to say any last words. I know that we're at the end of our time right now, so I understand some people might have to run away. So just one thing I want to make sure you all understand, because not all events they do. These events, in my belief, are the start of conversations. I'm expecting to go to LinkedIn and at least 20 or 30 people have connected, and let's continue those conversations. I coach a lot of youth on effective LinkedIn marketing, and if you want to continue talking, now's the time. Make sure you follow up and engage, and I know that these panelists are all very interactive and engaged. So I'm going to go through the first order I started with, Adrienne, Mike, and Pierre-Andre, and I wondered if you had any final notes or a message to the students.
I just want to pick up on a point that Mike made as a final point, is that we've got to, as much as often we talk about what we've lost, we've also got to remember what we're learning and what we're gaining, right? In this, like, and Pierre-Andre said, we've always adapted, and so I think we're building a really resilient generation here. And so I think that know that at any moment anything can change, and we always have to be rethinking. So that would be my, that I have a lot of hope for the future, and the questions and the conversations we're having about how we want to be different, as a collective humanity, is there's a lot of good things that are coming from this. So I think we're building resilience.
Great thoughts. Mike?
I would say, we're chatting earlier about, is this a good time to start a business? I would argue that there's never a better time. You are coming out of university, you have nothing to lose. You have more energy than you'll ever have, and you should just get on with it, because the network you have in place that you are in the process of developing will help you fall and get picked up and figure it out and move on. Do it now.
Great thoughts. Pierre-Andre, final words.
So I'll conclude with the Apex Business Plan Competition. I've been a judge for the past 9 years. And I think that I'd never seen so many participants as this year. So if it's not just because of COVID, I don't know what happened, but I think the fact that you were able to open it up to the rest of the world without having the traveling cost that used to be probably a barrier to attract those contestants and business plan in New Brunswick. Now, thanks to COVID-19 and the digital enablers, these platforms, I think you have a fantastic year and experience wonderful growth. So wish good luck to all the participants. And I'm looking forward to hearing and listening to them in the coming days.
Great. Thanks a lot. My own self is, I believe that entrepreneurship is not for most people a way to create personal wealth. I believe for most people, entrepreneurship is the passion and interest and taking the leap to create change. So stick your hand to the ether and make something happen. And usually it's for something positive, for your community, your customer, your family. So I think that I'm really excited about seeing more entrepreneurship in the coming years because there's lots of problems to solve. So I'm going to close the presentation of this discussion. We'll come back to tables. I understand that some people might have to run. I'll stick around if anybody wants to chat. On the table floor, you can navigate and you can look around. Feel free to ask me any questions or send me chats. And I look forward to connecting with you guys in the future over LinkedIn. Thank you very much to our panelists. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I did as well. This has been recorded, and UNB will tell me what they'd like to do with that, but I'm hoping that we can revisit this, and in the future we can tackle some more of those questions, because there's definitely many we didn't get to address. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Levi.
Thank you,
everyone.
Bye, Mike. Bye, Pierre. Bye, Pierre.